Enola Holmes' Sleep Mystery, What's Buried Under the Family Grave. Chapter 1, The Unearthed Secret. Bickley Hollow had always been a village that moved at a pace slower than the winds that rippled through its country lanes. Its cobbled streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and quaint houses with ivy creeping up their stone walls gave the illusion of an untouched, perfect world. The kind of place where one could spend their days sipping tea by the fire, minding their business, and hardly ever hearing the sound of trouble. The very idea of a mystery seemed out of place here. It was a place where life moved quietly, and people went about their business with little fuss. That was until the day the body was discovered. It was a clear afternoon when the news reached Enola Holmes. She had been exploring the small village of Bickley Hollow on a brief visit, hoping for nothing more than a quiet respite from the usual hustle of London. However, her peace was shattered when she overheard two elderly women gossiping in hushed tones over their tea at the local inn. Their conversation was not about the weather, nor the local gossip. This time, it was about something far more sinister. A body found, right under the old family grave, one woman whispered, her voice quivering with both excitement and fear. No one knows how it got there, but they say it was buried in the dead of night, almost as if it didn't belong to this world at all. Enola, ever curious and quick-witted, had barely heard the rest of the conversation. Her mind had already been set into motion. A body under a family grave? That was no ordinary death. This was the sort of thing that demanded investigation. She couldn't resist. She had to know more. After politely excusing herself from the inn, Enola made her way to the village churchyard. The old family grave, which had always been an eerie sight in the center of the churchyard, was where the village's most esteemed, albeit secretive, family, the Greystones, had buried their ancestors. The Greystones were a name spoken in reverence by many of the villagers. Not much was known about them, aside from the fact that they had lived in Bickley Hollow for generations, and their wealth and influence had grown quietly and steadily over time. It was said that they were still deeply involved in the running of the village, but little was known of their personal lives. When Enola arrived at the graveyard, she was met with the sight of a handful of local authorities clustered near the grave. A few of the village's more curious residents had gathered as well, muttering among themselves, their faces filled with a mix of disbelief and apprehension. The scene was strangely calm, almost as if the villagers couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Enola's sharp eyes immediately took in the details, two constables standing on either side of the grave, their hats tipped forward as if to shield their faces from the sun. A small crowd had gathered near the stone monument marking the grave, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. The grave itself was a towering affair, ancient, but still sturdy. A large slab of weathered stone marked it, but beneath the stone, something else lay buried, something that had not been there before. The constables noticed her approach, but before they could speak, Enola was already making her way toward the crowd. She had a knack for slipping into situations unnoticed, her presence hardly ever more than a ripple in the air. "Miss Holmes, I see you've come to see the spectacle," said a voice from behind her. Enola turned to see the village constable, a portly man by the name of Pyle, who had always seemed to favor the local gossip more than actual police work. "Spectacle, Constable Pyle?" Enola asked, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "This is no spectacle. It's a mystery waiting to be solved." Pyle looked at her with mild concern. "A mystery, you say? Well, there's certainly nothing to be solved here. A body was found, that's all. The villagers have been blabbering about it all day. Nothing more to it. Probably just another accident. Enola raised an eyebrow. And what makes you so sure of that? Well, Miss Holmes, Pyle continued, wiping his brow with a handkerchief, there's nothing strange about the death. It's just, well, no one knows who the body belongs to. That's the problem. We think it's someone from the Greystone family, but we can't say for certain. The whole thing is just unsettling. Enola's sharp gaze lingered on Pyle for a moment. But why under the grave? Why not simply bury the body in the cemetery, like everyone else? At this, Pyle paused, his face betraying a hint of confusion. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. We don't know. But we've got a local doctor coming to examine the body now. Maybe he'll have an explanation. Enola's mind was already racing. A body found beneath the Greystone family grave, and no one knew how it had gotten there? That was far more than a simple accident. The village was full of gossip, sure, but this was something else entirely. She could feel it, the same way she always did when something wasn't quite right. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. A tall, thin man in a long black coat appeared from behind the crowd, his face set in a determined expression. The doctor had arrived. Dr. Mortimer, Pyle said, nodding to the newcomer. I trust you can help us sort out this mess. Dr. Mortimer nodded but said nothing as he walked toward the grave. His cold eyes surveyed the area with clinical detachment. He knelt down beside the stone slab marking the grave and began inspecting the ground, muttering to himself as he did. The constables watched in silence. Enola, however, was not content with standing back. As always, her curiosity got the better of her. She moved closer, peering over the doctor's shoulder as he began to carefully pull away the dirt from the base of the grave. Beneath the stone slab, something gleamed faintly in the sunlight, something metallic, perhaps. A moment later, the doctor's hands emerged, gripping a small, tarnished key. Miss Holmes, Dr. Mortimer said, his voice low but urgent. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at this? Enola knelt beside him, her eyes widening as she saw the key in his hand. It was an old-fashioned thing, intricately designed with delicate engravings. But it wasn't the key that fascinated her. It was the fact that it had been buried under the family grave. Why would someone bury a key here? And more importantly, what did it unlock? Where does this key lead? She asked, her voice sharp with excitement. Dr. Mortimer looked at her for a moment before he spoke. That, Miss Holmes, is the mystery we now must solve. Chapter 2: The Key to the Past. Enola's fingers lingered over the small, tarnished key in Dr. Mortimer's hand, her mind racing with questions. Why had someone gone to such lengths to bury this key under the Greystone family grave? And why was it hidden in such a manner that no one had discovered it until now? She could sense that the key was important, an answer to a puzzle she had only just begun to understand. It was a feeling she was all too familiar with. Dr. Mortimer examined her expression closely, clearly aware of the intrigue this key had stirred in her. I know what you're thinking, Miss Holmes, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man who appeared to be so detached. But the truth is, we know very little about this. The key could be a family heirloom, or it could lead to something more unsavory. We just don't know. Then we must find out, Enola replied firmly, her gaze never leaving the key. She could already tell this was no ordinary trinket. What does the Greystone family say about this? Has anyone questioned them? Dr. Mortimer frowned. The Greystones, as you might expect, have not been particularly forthcoming. They've been mostly silent on the matter. The family estate is large, and many of them have been away, tending to their other business. However, they've agreed to let us investigate further, but I do not suspect their direct involvement. Enola raised an eyebrow. That is highly suspicious. The family, distant or not, should be far more concerned about someone being buried beneath their grave. Dr. Mortimer's lips tightened. That's why we've had the constables investigating. We don't want to start a scandal without more evidence. Enola turned her attention back to the grave. Her mind was already forming a theory, but she knew better than to jump to conclusions. The key, buried beneath the grave, was surely connected to the Greystones, but how? Perhaps we should visit the Greystone estate, she suggested, standing up. We may find something more useful there, perhaps a locked door or chest that this key fits. Dr. Mortimer looked up at her, seemingly surprised by her suggestion. You're not one to waste time, are you, Miss Holmes? Very well. But be careful. You're treading on delicate ground. Enola flashed him a smile, her eyes full of resolve. Care is my middle name, Doctor. I'll be cautious. But mysteries like these are never solved by standing around. The Greystone estate was a sprawling manor located on the outskirts of Bickley Hollow, sitting atop a small rise that overlooked the rest of the village. As Enola approached, she couldn't help but marvel at the grandeur of the place. The estate, though old, was well kept, with ivy creeping up the stone walls and manicured gardens surrounding the house. Despite its beauty, there was an air of foreboding about it, as though the house itself was hiding more than just time-worn secrets. As they arrived at the front gate, the iron bars gleamed in the midday sun. A tall, finely dressed butler stood at attention at the door. His name, Enola had learned, was Mr. Finley. He had been employed by the Greystone family for decades, and his calm, almost robotic demeanor made it clear that he wasn't particularly fond of unexpected visitors. Good day, Miss Holmes, Dr. Mortimer, Mr. Finley said, his voice neutral, almost too practiced. The family is not in, but you are expected. Follow me, please. Enola's eyes narrowed slightly. Expected? This wasn't an official invitation, and yet they'd known she was coming. Suspicious. But she kept her thoughts to herself, following Mr. Finley into the estate. The interior of the house was just as grand as the exterior, if not more so. High ceilings, expensive paintings, and elegant furniture filled the rooms. It was a place where wealth and privilege practically oozed from the walls. As they moved through the corridors, Enola caught glimpses of family portraits hanging on the walls. The Greystones, a proud and ancient family, stood tall in every frame, their stiff, formal poses speaking volumes about their desire for control. They were led into a large study where Enola immediately noticed the odd absence of personal belongings. There were books, certainly, bookshelves lined the walls. But there were no personal mementos, no family photographs or trinkets. It was as if the Greystones had carefully curated their image for outsiders. Please, make yourselves comfortable, Mr. Finley said stiffly, stepping aside. Dr. Mortimer took a seat in one of the plush chairs, but Enola couldn't sit still. She walked around the room, her keen eyes scanning every inch of the study. Nothing seemed out of place, at least, not at first glance. But she knew better than to trust appearances. Her gaze fell upon a large desk in the corner of the room. A single drawer was slightly ajar, and there, on the edge of the desk, lay a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn from years of use. "That's odd," Enola muttered, mostly to herself, but loud enough for Dr. Mortimer to hear. "What is, Miss Holmes?" he asked, his attention now fully on her. "This journal," Enola replied, her fingers brushing against the leather cover. "It's very old. And it's sitting here in plain view, as if someone has just forgotten it. Why leave it out in the open?" Dr. Mortimer leaned forward, his interest piqued. "It could be an important document, I suppose. Perhaps something the family doesn't want us to see." Enola gave him a pointed look. "Exactly. That's why we should take a closer look." Without waiting for Dr. Mortimer's agreement, Enola opened the journal. The pages were yellowed with age, but the handwriting inside was clear. It was a personal diary, one that seemed to belong to someone in the Greystone family, perhaps a father or an uncle. As she flipped through the pages, certain phrases caught her eye. "The key to everything lies beneath the earth. We must protect it at all costs. The family grave is a symbol of our power. Nothing, not even death, should be allowed to break the seal." Enola's heart began to race. The journal was filled with cryptic entries, references to the family grave, the key, and a sense of urgency that had not been present in other family records. There was a clear connection to the grave where the body had been found, and perhaps even more concerning, it seemed to suggest that the Greystones had been involved in something much darker than just their social status. Dr. Mortimer leaned over her shoulder. "What have you found?" "This," Enola said, her voice steady, though her mind was reeling. "The journal speaks of something hidden beneath the family grave. It's more than just a burial site, it's a symbol. A symbol of power, something that's been kept secret for generations." Dr. Mortimer paled slightly, as though the weight of her words had just hit him. "This could explain the body. And the key you found in the grave. But we must be careful, Miss Holmes. These things, these secrets, are never meant to be unearthed." Enola closed the journal with a soft snap, her expression determined. "We can't stop now, Doctor. The truth is buried beneath that grave. And I intend to find it, no matter what it costs." Chapter 3, A Family Secret. Enola could feel the weight of the journal in her hands, the pages crinkling softly as she closed it with a sense of finality. The cryptic words inside were more than just idle musings, they were a key, a clue that led deeper into the mystery. The key to everything lies beneath the earth. Enola's heart beat faster at the thought. Whatever the Greystones had been hiding, it was buried beneath their family grave. And now, with the key in her possession, the puzzle was beginning to take shape. Dr. Mortimer, who had been standing beside her, looked uneasy, his gaze shifting between the journal and the room around them. "Miss Holmes, this is not a matter we should delve into lightly. The Greystones are powerful, and they will not take kindly to someone poking around in their family secrets." Enola turned to face him, her eyes sparkling with determination. "Doctor, the truth is buried under that grave. People's lives are at stake, Miss Cranford's life, most importantly. She knew something, and I believe it's tied to the Greystones' past. We can't walk away from this. Dr. Mortimer sighed but nodded, though doubt still clouded his eyes. You're relentless, Miss Holmes. But I must warn you, the deeper you dig, the more dangerous it becomes. Enola gave him a small smile. Danger is my middle name, Doctor. Dr. Mortimer chuckled lightly, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. I suppose it is, Miss Holmes. But I still don't understand. How do we proceed from here? Enola paused, her fingers lightly touching the pages of the journal again, her mind working through the possibilities. There was something more to uncover, something the Greystones had kept hidden for far too long. They had protected their legacy for generations, but now, with the key in her hands, Enola knew that the truth would soon be exposed. We start by revisiting the grave, she said, her voice firm. The journal mentions that the grave is a symbol of power. That means whatever is hidden beneath it is of great importance. The family has gone to great lengths to protect it. We need to find out exactly what lies underneath that grave and how it ties into the Greystones' secrets. Dr. Mortimer hesitated, but finally nodded. Very well. But we'll need to be discreet. If the family has been guarding this secret for so long, I doubt they'll be willing to simply let us dig around in their past. Enola nodded in agreement. We'll be careful. But time is of the essence. If we're going to find Miss Cranford and solve this mystery, we have to act quickly. The next day, Enola and Dr. Mortimer returned to Bickley Hollow. This time, however, they weren't going to the churchyard in plain sight. Enola had come up with a plan to investigate the grave without drawing attention. It would take cunning and a good deal of stealth, but Enola had always been adept at slipping past the eyes of the authorities. The day was overcast, with a light drizzle falling from the heavens, creating the perfect cover for their mission. The graveyard was nearly empty when they arrived. Only the faint sound of the wind and the occasional rustle of leaves broke the silence as they made their way toward the family grave. As they approached, Enola couldn't help but notice how imposing the Greystone family's grave truly was. It was a grand structure, with intricate carvings that depicted symbols of power, crests, swords, and shields. There was a sense of finality to it, as though the Greystones had planned for their legacy to be eternal, untouched by time. This is it, Enola said softly, as she knelt before the grave. The ground was damp from the recent rain, but she could see that there was something unusual about the area around the base of the grave. The soil looked freshly disturbed, and the large stone that marked the Greystone family plot seemed to have been moved recently. Dr. Mortimer bent down beside her, his expression grave. It looks like someone has been here recently. But who? Enola's mind was already racing. The Greystones? Or someone else trying to uncover what's hidden here? She glanced around quickly, ensuring they were still alone. We need to dig. Dr. Mortimer looked nervous. Miss Holmes, we're not. But Enola was already on her knees, carefully moving aside the soil with her hands. We don't have time to waste, Doctor. It wasn't long before she uncovered a small metal object, hidden beneath the earth. Enola's breath caught in her throat as she pulled it free, a box, small and ornately designed, with the Greystone family crest embossed on the top. The box was cold to the touch, its metal tarnished with age, but it was unmistakably valuable. "That's it," Enola said, her voice full of quiet excitement. "This must be the thing they've been hiding." Dr. Mortimer, who had been watching anxiously from behind her, now stepped forward. "What are you going to do with it?" Enola paused for a moment, then carefully pried open the box. Inside, there was a set of old documents, parchments that had yellowed with age but were still intact. There was also a small, delicate key, a key that matched the one they had found earlier. The key fit perfectly into the box, suggesting that it had once been a crucial part of the family's secret. "What is this?" Dr. Mortimer asked, leaning over her shoulder. Enola didn't answer immediately. She had already begun to examine the documents, her eyes scanning the fragile pages for clues. They were written in a fine, flowing script, but the words were unfamiliar, the language ancient. It was clear that these were records that tied the Greystones to something much larger than a mere family of aristocrats. She frowned, flipping through the pages. And then, as her eyes fell on one particular passage, her heart skipped a beat. The writing described a secret society, one that the Greystones had been a part of for centuries. The society's purpose was not just wealth or power, but something far darker. The Greystones are the keepers of the key. They hold the knowledge to unlock the greatest power of all. The key must never be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. It is the key to the bloodline and the wealth of the earth. Enola's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a family secret. This was something much more sinister, something that involved power, control, and a legacy that had been kept hidden from the rest of the world. "The key is more than just a symbol," Enola murmured, more to herself than to Dr. Mortimer. "It's the key to something much larger. And it's been hidden here, under this grave, all these years." Dr. Mortimer stepped back, his face pale. "You're right, Miss Holmes. This is bigger than we thought. But what does it mean? What are they trying to protect?" Enola closed the box and stood up, her mind racing with the implications of what she had uncovered. "That's what we need to find out," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "We need to trace the history of this society, understand its connections, and learn what the Greystones have been guarding for centuries." "But who else is after this knowledge?" Dr. Mortimer asked, his voice tinged with fear. "If the Greystones have been protecting this secret, then others must want it, too." Enola met his gaze, her eyes hardening with determination. "And we will find them, Doctor. Whatever it takes." Chapter 4: The Greystone Legacy. The sky was heavy with the promise of rain as Enola and Dr. Mortimer made their way back to the village, the small metal box securely tucked inside Enola's satchel. The discovery beneath the family grave had only deepened the mystery surrounding the Greystone family and their long-hidden secrets. A society of power and influence, guarded for centuries by the Greystones, was not something Enola could simply ignore. This was bigger than Miss Cranford's disappearance. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that the Greystones' past was tied to something far more dangerous than she had originally thought. Dr. Mortimer walked beside her, his usual composure replaced by a palpable sense of concern. "Miss Holmes, I must admit, this is beyond anything I expected," he said, his voice low. "What could the Greystones possibly be protecting that requires such secrecy?" Enola glanced at him, her eyes flashing with determination. "That's exactly what we need to find out. The Greystones have spent generations hiding their secrets. But now we know, whatever it is, it's powerful. And it's time to uncover it. They continued their walk, their path leading them past the village square, where the usual bustle had quieted with the falling rain. The villagers, who had initially gossiped about the discovery of the body beneath the grave, were now oddly silent. The gossip had died down, but Enola could sense that the air was thick with an unspoken fear. It wasn't just the body or the discovery that had unsettled the village, it was the thought that something far more sinister was hidden beneath it all. As they reached the edge of the village, Enola's thoughts turned back to the box. It was small, delicate, and seemed so unassuming, but she knew it was a key to unraveling the mystery. The key they had found matched it, and the writings within the journal had clearly marked it as something central to the Greystone family's legacy. But there was still so much more to uncover. "Doctor," Enola said as they slowed their pace, "I think it's time we looked into the Greystones' history more thoroughly. We need to understand what this society was, how it functioned, and why it has lasted for so long." Dr. Mortimer's brow furrowed. The Greystones have always been an enigma. They've kept their affairs private, their history carefully guarded. I don't believe there's a single person in this village who knows the full extent of their involvement with this society. That's precisely why we need to look beyond the village, Enola said. We need to find out what kind of society they were involved with. What did it mean to be the keepers of the key? Dr. Mortimer nodded reluctantly. But how do we go about that? If the family has hidden their connections for so long, it's unlikely that there's any record we can simply find lying around. Enola's lips curled into a slight smile. "Oh, but I have an idea." She tapped the side of her satchel. "There's a book of Greystone family records at the village library. I've seen it before, it's kept under lock and key, but I'm sure we could find a way to gain access." Dr. Mortimer seemed skeptical. "It might be worth a try, but we'll need a good reason to look through their records. The Greystones are influential, and I'm sure they won't take kindly to a pair of curious outsiders poking around in their affairs." Enola's gaze hardened with resolve. "We don't need their permission. We need the truth." The library was a small, ancient building near the center of the village. Its stone exterior was weathered by time, much like the village itself. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with books that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. The Greystone family records were said to be housed in a special cabinet in the back room, locked away from prying eyes. Enola and Dr. Mortimer slipped inside, careful not to attract attention. The librarian, a gruff woman named Miss Harrington, was sitting behind the front desk, her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose as she scanned the contents of a thick ledger. She didn't seem to notice them at first, but Enola knew that it wouldn't be long before they were noticed. "Good afternoon, Miss Harrington," Enola said brightly, walking toward the front desk with an air of casual ease. "I hope you're well today." Miss Harrington looked up, her expression neutral, but there was a hint of suspicion in her eyes. "Miss Holmes, Dr. Mortimer," she said with a curt nod. "What brings you here today?" "We're looking into the Greystone family history," Enola said without hesitation, her voice calm. "I believe there's a record of their ancestors in the back room, and I was hoping we might have a look." Miss Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly. "That section is restricted. The Greystone records are considered private." I'm afraid I can't let you in without a very good reason. Enola, always quick on her feet, smiled disarmingly. I'm sure you understand, Miss Harrington. With all that's been happening in the village lately, what with the body being discovered under the family grave, I thought it might be helpful to learn more about the Greystones. You know, their role in the village's history. Dr. Mortimer stepped in, his voice smooth and persuasive. We're not trying to cause any trouble, Miss Harrington. We just want to understand the context of the events. If we don't have access to their records, we might miss something important. Miss Harrington hesitated, glancing between the two of them. Enola held her breath, waiting for her decision. Finally, with a resigned sigh, Miss Harrington rose from behind the desk. Very well, she said, her voice tinged with reluctance. But I'll be accompanying you. I can't let you handle the records alone. Enola and Dr. Mortimer exchanged a quick glance before nodding in agreement. As long as they could get to the records, they could work with whatever precautions Miss Harrington took. In the back room, Enola immediately spotted the cabinet, the one that Miss Harrington had warned them about. It was a tall, dark oak structure, with a thick iron lock securing its contents. The key was in Miss Harrington's hand, and as she unlocked the cabinet, Enola's excitement grew. This was it. The information they needed was just within reach. The first few books Enola examined seemed to be family records, dating back hundreds of years. But it was the last book she pulled out that caught her attention. It was bound in black leather, its pages faded with age, and written in a language Enola didn't immediately recognize. What is this? Dr. Mortimer asked, peering over her shoulder as she opened the book to the first page. I'm not sure, Enola murmured. But I think we've found what we're looking for. The pages were filled with the names of Greystone ancestors, but there were also strange symbols scattered throughout the text, symbols that seemed to correspond with those she had seen at the family grave. These symbols were linked to something more than just lineage. They were a code, a language that spoke of power, secrecy, and legacy. Enola's heart raced. This was no ordinary family history. This was a record of the Greystone family's involvement with the secret society they had been guarding for generations. She turned to the next page. The language was more complex here, but the message was clearer. The Greystones had been entrusted with the key to a powerful and dangerous secret, one that could alter the course of history. This is it, Enola whispered. The society, the secret they've been guarding. The Greystones are the key holders. They've been hiding something powerful. And now, we're about to uncover it. Chapter 5, The Hidden Chamber. The air in the library was thick with the scent of old leather and parchment, the weight of centuries of history pressing down on Enola as she studied the ancient Greystone family records. Her fingers traced the symbols on the pages, her mind working furiously to decode their meaning. The cryptic language, strange and foreign, seemed to speak of more than just family lineage. It was a coded history, one that carried the weight of a secret so powerful that the Greystones had spent generations guarding it. This can't be just about wealth and power, Enola murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The Greystones were guarding something far more dangerous. But what? Dr. Mortimer, standing beside her, watched her closely, his face etched with concern. Miss Holmes, I'm beginning to think this is not just a matter of family secrets anymore. The more I read, the more I'm convinced this society the Greystones were part of wasn't just a local affair, it was something far-reaching, something that could change everything. Enola's eyes narrowed as she scanned the text again. If we can figure out what this key unlocks, what the Greystones were protecting, we can understand the danger they've kept hidden for so long. Dr. Mortimer's gaze shifted to the cabinet where the records had been stored. And you believe it's linked to that cryptic key we found? The one buried under the grave? Enola nodded. The key is a physical object, a symbol of access. But access to what? The Greystones must have used it to secure something of immense importance. The family grave, the journal, the key, it's all tied together. I just need to figure out how. As they turned back to the desk, Miss Harrington, the librarian, cleared her throat from the doorway. Enola had almost forgotten she was there, but the woman's watchful eyes never left them. I'm afraid I must insist, Miss Harrington said, her voice soft but firm. That book you're examining, it is not to be taken lightly. These records are the private property of the Greystone family. I'm sure you understand that. Enola stood up straight, her fingers still lingering on the open page. I understand, Miss Harrington. But I think you might want to reconsider the importance of these records. If they're truly as significant as I believe they are, you'll want to know what's hidden inside them too. Miss Harrington's lips pressed into a tight line, but her eyes shifted to the pages of the book. The Greystones have always been careful to protect their history, Miss Holmes. You may find that some things are better left buried. Enola ignored the warning. She could feel it, there was something vital here, something buried so deep in the family's past that the Greystones had gone to extreme lengths to keep it hidden. I'm sorry, Miss Harrington. But I have no intention of leaving this mystery unsolved. The librarian remained silent, her expression unreadable, but Enola could tell that the woman was no longer certain of her position. Whether it was out of fear or curiosity, she wasn't sure, but something in Miss Harrington's demeanor had shifted. Enola knew she was walking a fine line, but it wasn't just about solving the mystery. It was about protecting the village from the danger that lurked just beneath the surface. Dr. Mortimer, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a break, Miss Holmes. A fresh perspective might help us make sense of this. Enola's brow furrowed, but she nodded reluctantly. You're right, Doctor. We've uncovered something, but we still don't know what it all means. Perhaps it's time to think. The next morning, Enola set out to visit the Greystone estate. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became that the key wasn't just a family heirloom. It was a literal key, a means of unlocking something hidden deep within the family's vaults. The journal, the coded text, and the key all pointed to one thing, a secret chamber that the Greystones had kept concealed for generations. The estate was as imposing as ever, its stone walls standing tall against the gray sky. Enola walked up to the massive front gate, her heart pounding in anticipation. She had already contacted a trusted local mason, an old acquaintance of hers who specialized in old estates, and arranged for him to meet her at the Greystone house. She needed someone who knew the estate's history, the hidden passages, the forgotten rooms, the things that weren't on any official map. The gate creaked open with an eerie groan as Enola stepped inside. The mansion loomed before her, cold and forbidding, but she knew that she was closer than ever to unlocking the mystery. She was met by a tall, wiry man with sharp features, Cecil Morrow, the mason she had hired. He offered a small, polite smile when he saw her. Miss Holmes, He greeted her in a low voice, his eyes scanning the grounds nervously. "I trust you've found what you're looking for?" "I believe so," Enola replied, her voice steady. "Do you have the tools you need?" Morrow nodded. Mississippi. I've come prepared. But I'll warn you, it's not easy getting into places that have been sealed for centuries." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Enola said with a smile. They moved toward the back of the house, where Enola knew there was an old servant's entrance. It was hidden away from view, a side door that had likely been forgotten by most of the estate's current inhabitants. But Enola knew that it was where she would find the entrance to the secret chamber she had been searching for. The door was old and heavy, the wood creaking as Morrow applied his strength to open it. Beyond it was a narrow staircase that led down into the bowels of the house. Enola's heart raced as they descended, the air growing colder the farther they went. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the darkness, each step bringing them closer to the truth. Finally, they reached the bottom of the stairs, where Morrow paused, his hand resting on the stone wall. He looked at Enola, his expression serious. "This is it," he said softly. "This is where the Greystones kept their secrets." The chamber before them was vast, its stone walls lined with shelves and dusty artifacts. There was no light here, save for the faint glow of sunlight filtering through a small window near the ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood. But it wasn't the contents of the chamber that caught Enola's attention, it was what lay in the center. In the middle of the room was a large stone pedestal, on which rested an ancient chest, its surface covered in dust and time. Enola stepped forward, her fingers itching with anticipation. "This is it," she said quietly. "The chest that holds the truth." With a steady hand, she opened the chest, revealing a collection of documents, maps, and sealed letters, all marked with the Greystone family crest. But one document stood out, its parchment yellowed with age, its seal intact. Enola carefully unsealed the letter and unrolled it. The writing inside was familiar, a code she had seen before in the family records. It was a final letter from the head of the Greystone family, one that spoke of the society's true purpose, and the power it had hidden for generations. It spoke of a key, one that unlocked not just a physical chamber, but a secret that had the potential to change the course of history. Enola read the words aloud, her voice steady but filled with awe. "The Greystones hold the key to a legacy that must never be revealed. The bloodline is the key. Protected at all costs, for the power contained within it could destroy the world if it falls into the wrong hands." Dr. Mortimer, who had been standing quietly behind her, stepped forward. This is what they've been hiding?" Enola nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Yes. And now, we have to decide what to do with it." Chapter 6: The Cost of Truth. The weight of the letter in Enola's hands felt heavier with each passing second. The words on the parchment burned into her memory, not just with their significance but with the gravity of what they implied. The Greystones had hidden the secret of their bloodline, a secret with the power to destroy the world if it falls into the wrong hands. The question now wasn't just about what the family had been hiding, but whether anyone could be trusted with such a secret, least of all Enola herself. Her fingers hovered over the document, reluctant to put it back in the chest. Dr. Mortimer, who had been standing quietly by, seemed to sense her hesitation. He cleared his throat and spoke softly. "Miss Holmes, I fear this is far more dangerous than I initially realized. A secret like this, if exposed, could tear this village apart. The Greystones didn't just bury their past in the graveyard. They buried it in every corner of this land. It's woven into the very fabric of Bickley Hollow. Enola looked up at Dr. Mortimer, her expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of responsibility pushing down on her chest. She had uncovered a powerful truth, but now it felt as if the very act of knowing it might change the course of her life, and possibly the world, forever. "We can't let this secret stay buried," Enola said firmly. "The Greystones might have thought they could control it, but their legacy is built on lies. It's time the world knew the truth." Dr. Mortimer frowned, his gaze flicking to the chest and the ancient documents inside. "And what if the truth is more dangerous than we anticipate? What if it's too powerful to be revealed?" "We're not just talking about the Greystones anymore, Miss Holmes. We're talking about something that could have a far-reaching impact." Enola's grip tightened on the letter. "The truth always has consequences, Doctor. But it's better to face those consequences than to allow this family to keep manipulating the world for their own gain." Before Dr. Mortimer could respond, a loud creaking sound echoed through the chamber, and the door to the room swung open. Enola's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced as she turned to face whoever had entered. Was it a servant from the Greystone estate? Had they been caught? But instead of a servant, the figure who entered was one Enola had hoped to avoid. It was Mr. Finley, the Greystone family butler, standing tall in the doorway, his expression hard and unforgiving. "I'm afraid you've gone too far this time, Miss Holmes," he said, his voice low, though laced with barely contained anger. Enola's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. "Mr. Finley," she said, her voice steady. "It seems we've stumbled onto something the Greystones have been hiding for generations. Perhaps you'd care to explain why?" Mr. Finley's eyes narrowed, but there was no fear in them, only a cold, calculating resolve. "The Greystones have protected their legacy for centuries, Miss Holmes. And I won't let you, or anyone, unearth what's been buried for so long. The consequences of what you're holding in your hands go beyond Bickley Hollow. This is a matter of national importance." Enola's heart raced, her mind whirling. What did he mean? National importance? Was this about more than just a family secret? Had the Greystones been involved in something larger, something that reached beyond the confines of their village? The idea that the society had connections to powerful people, perhaps even to government officials, made Enola's stomach churn with unease. "I don't care about the Greystones' legacy, Mr. Finley," Enola said, her voice firm. "I care about the truth. The truth that has been buried under this estate, under that grave, and behind 1,000 lies." Finley stepped into the room, his eyes still fixed on Enola. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Miss Holmes. This isn't some child's game, some trivial mystery. The Greystones are not just a family. They are the key to something far older, far more dangerous. And I'm afraid you're too late to stop it." Enola's heart pounded. "Too late for what, Mr. Finley? What is the Greystone family really protecting?" At that, Finley's lips curled into a grim smile. "It's not just a secret. It's a power. And it's been passed down from generation to generation, through the bloodline of the Greystones. This power, it's not just financial or political. It's something far more significant. You wouldn't understand. I might not understand it all yet, but I will, Enola said, standing tall, her eyes never leaving his. I've already uncovered enough to know that the Greystones have been hiding something far darker than just wealth. They're part of something that could change everything. Finley's eyes flashed with an emotion Enola couldn't quite read, but his expression hardened again as he spoke. You're treading on dangerous ground, Miss Holmes. If you pursue this any further, you'll regret it. You've already come far enough that you cannot turn back. Enola could feel the warning in his words, but it only strengthened her resolve. I don't regret anything. Not when it comes to uncovering the truth. Finley stepped forward, his hand reaching inside his coat, and Enola's heart skipped a beat. Was he going to threaten her? But then, instead of a weapon, he pulled out a small, folded piece of paper and set it on the desk in front of her. You don't know who you're dealing with, he repeated, his voice quieter now. But if you truly want to know the truth, you'll take this and meet the people who can explain it all. But be warned, Miss Holmes, this path leads to consequences you cannot undo. Enola stared at the paper for a long moment. Who are they? Who's behind the Greystones? Finley didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before he left. You'll find your answers if you follow the instructions. But once you do, there will be no going back. With that, he exited, leaving Enola and Dr. Mortimer in the chamber, the silence hanging heavy between them. Enola sat down at the desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the piece of paper. On it was a simple address, written in neat handwriting. No names, no additional instructions, just an address. What do you think, Doctor? Enola asked, her voice a little softer now, the gravity of the situation settling in. Do we go? Dr. Mortimer, who had been silent since Finley left, finally spoke. I think you're right to keep going, Miss Holmes. But I also think we should be careful. Whoever this is, they're clearly tied to the Greystones in some way. This isn't just about solving a local mystery anymore. It's about something much larger. Enola nodded. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. I know, Doctor. But it's too late to stop now. We've uncovered the truth, and now we have to see it through. She stood up, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into her pocket. Tomorrow, we'll follow the address. And we'll find out exactly what the Greystones have been hiding. Dr. Mortimer looked at her with concern. Be careful, Miss Holmes. We may not be ready for what we're about to uncover. Enola smiled grimly. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Chapter 7, The Meeting of Shadows. The address written on the small piece of paper had led them far outside the quiet confines of Bickley Hollow. As Enola and Dr. Mortimer journeyed toward the appointed location, the landscape changed around them. The cobbled streets of the village gave way to narrow, winding roads, the houses becoming fewer and farther between. The weather had turned colder, and the sky, now a thick blanket of gray, seemed to close in on them, pressing down with a weight that matched the unease growing in Enola's chest. The address had led them to a small, secluded estate on the edge of the woods. The house, though impressive in its own right, seemed strangely out of place here, surrounded by thick trees and a haze of mist that swirled around the ground. It looked abandoned, as though it had been forgotten by the world. This place gives me the creeps, Dr. Mortimer muttered, his voice low. He adjusted his glasses, as if they could provide some clarity in the midst of the fog. Enola didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied the house in front of them, taking in every detail. The large iron gates were slightly ajar, creaking with the wind. The path leading to the front door was overgrown with ivy, and the windows, though intact, seemed shrouded in shadows. "Stay alert," Enola said, her voice steady. "We don't know who we're dealing with yet. If Finley is right, this could be far more dangerous than we anticipated." They moved cautiously toward the entrance, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth beneath them. As they reached the front door, Enola hesitated for just a moment, her hand hovering over the brass knocker. She had never been one to shy away from danger, but this was different. Everything about this place, the secrecy surrounding it, felt like it was designed to keep people out, and for good reason. With a deep breath, Enola lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the house, harsh and unsettling in the silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Enola glanced at Dr. Mortimer, but his worried expression mirrored her own. It seemed as though they were on the edge of something unknown and vast. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, thin man standing in the doorway. He wore a long, dark coat, and his face was obscured by the shadow of the porch, but there was something cold and calculating about his posture. "Miss Holmes." "Dr. Mortimer," the man said, his voice low and clipped. "I was expecting you." Enola felt a chill run down her spine. "You know who we are?" The man nodded, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I do. And I know what you've been searching for. You've uncovered more than you realize. Come in. There is much we need to discuss." Enola exchanged a quick look with Dr. Mortimer, who nodded slightly, as though to reassure her. They stepped into the house, the door closing behind them with a soft thud that seemed to seal them in. The air inside was thick with dust and the musty scent of old books. The furniture was grand but shrouded in sheets, as though the house hadn't seen guests in years. It felt more like a museum than a home. "Please," the man gestured toward a room to their right. "Sit. We have much to talk about." Enola sat down cautiously, Dr. Mortimer following suit. The man remained standing, his back straight, as though he was waiting for something. Enola couldn't help but feel the weight of his presence. There was a quiet menace to him, a power that lurked just beneath the surface. After a long moment, the man spoke again. "You've uncovered the Greystone family's secret, Miss Holmes. And now, I must ask, what do you intend to do with it?" Enola tilted her head, her gaze sharp. "I intend to expose it. The world deserves to know what the Greystones have been hiding, and the power they've been hoarding for generations." The man smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "You think exposing the Greystones will bring justice? You think the world will be better off knowing their secrets? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Enola leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I know more than you think. And I won't stop until the truth is revealed." For a long moment, the man didn't respond. He simply stood there, studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "Very well, Miss Holmes. If you insist on going down this path, then there is no turning back. But understand this, the Greystones have been keeping this secret for a reason. It's not just about power or wealth. It's about something much older. Something that could destroy everything you hold dear if it falls into the wrong hands. Enola's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? The man's gaze darkened. The Greystones were part of a society, an ancient one, with ties to people of great influence, both here and abroad. Their bloodline is the key to unlocking a power so great, so dangerous, that it could tip the balance of the world. The Greystones have been the keepers of this secret for centuries. They've protected it at great cost. And now, you, Miss Holmes, have stumbled upon it. Enola's mind raced. What is this power? What exactly are the Greystones hiding? The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but it was devoid of warmth. The Greystones have protected the key to immortality. Enola's breath caught in her throat. Immortality? Yes, he said, his voice low and gravely serious. The Greystones were chosen centuries ago to safeguard a secret so ancient it predates the history of this very land. A secret that grants the power to extend life beyond the natural limits of the human body. But it comes at a price. The key, the bloodline, must remain pure. If the key falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. Not just the Greystones, but the world itself. Dr. Mortimer shook his head, clearly struggling to process what the man had said. But immortality is impossible. It's a myth. The man's eyes were cold. It's very real. And it's more than just a myth, it's a weapon. A weapon that, in the wrong hands, could be used to bend the world to the will of those who seek to control it. Enola's mind was reeling. The Greystones, the key, the society, it was all connected to something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But now, it was clear that she wasn't just uncovering a family secret. She was standing at the precipice of something much larger. I have no intention of letting anyone control this power, Enola said firmly, her voice unwavering. And I won't let the Greystones, or anyone else, use it for their own purposes. The man's expression darkened. Then you must understand the consequences of your actions. The Greystones aren't the only ones who know about the key. Others are already hunting for it, hunting for the power it holds. You'll have to make a choice, Miss Holmes. Will you protect the secret and keep it buried, or will you risk everything to expose the truth? Enola's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities. The Greystones had been the keepers of this secret for centuries, but now the world knew. And others, more dangerous than she could have imagined, were already after it. She looked the man in the eye. I will expose the truth. No matter the cost. The man nodded, as though he had been expecting this answer. Then you are already part of this battle, Miss Holmes. Welcome to the fight. Chapter 8, The Shadow of the Key. Enola sat in the dimly lit room, the words the man had spoken echoing in her mind. Immortality. She had known the Greystones had secrets, dark ones, buried for generations, but the idea of eternal life, a power so ancient and dangerous that it could reshape the world, was beyond anything she had ever imagined. She glanced at Dr. Mortimer, who sat across from her, still processing the enormity of what they had just learned. His eyes were wide, and his lips were tight, as though he couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. Immortality, Dr. Mortimer muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. It sounds like something from a legend, something made up to frighten children. Surely there must be another explanation. Enola's gaze remained fixed on the man who had led them here. He had spoken with such quiet authority, revealing the Greystones' involvement in an ancient society that had guarded the secret of eternal life for centuries. But the more Enola thought about it, the more certain she became. This was no myth. This was real. We have to keep going, Enola said, her voice firm and filled with determination. The key is still out there. The Greystones aren't the only ones who know about it. The others, whoever they are, they're already after it. And we can't let them have it. Dr. Mortimer exhaled sharply. And if this key truly grants immortality, Miss Holmes, what do we do with it? Even if we find it, we can't just destroy it. That kind of power, in the wrong hands, could be catastrophic. I'm not sure what the answer is yet, Doctor, Enola replied, her eyes narrowing. But we can't let it fall into the wrong hands. And that's exactly what will happen if we don't act quickly. The man who had led them into the house stood silently in the corner, his cold eyes watching them both, waiting. Enola turned her gaze to him, her expression hard. You still haven't told us who you are, she said, her voice steady but full of suspicion. Who are you really, and why are you involved in all of this? The man didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, and leaned against the stone fireplace. His cold smile never wavered. I am a messenger, Miss Holmes. A guardian of sorts, though not of the same caliber as the Greystones themselves. I've been tasked with ensuring the key remains out of the wrong hands, but I also believe that certain truths should not be buried forever. This secret is far too dangerous to remain hidden. Enola studied him closely. There was something unsettling about his calm demeanor, the way he seemed to hold so much knowledge yet withheld so much more. His connection to the Greystones was unclear, but she didn't trust him. And you think you can control it? Enola asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. You think you can keep this power from falling into the wrong hands? The man's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. The Greystones thought they could control it, too. They thought they were the chosen ones, the only ones worthy of guarding it. But as you've already seen, Miss Holmes, there's always someone else waiting in the shadows. People who would stop at nothing to get their hands on the key. The weight of his words settled in Enola's chest. She couldn't help but wonder how far this man would go to protect this power, or to control it himself. There was something about his presence that made her wary, something about the way he spoke that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. But we don't have time to debate ideals, he continued, his voice steady. We need to act. The Greystones aren't the only ones who know about the key. There are others who've been searching for it for years, and they're already closing in. You won't be able to stop them by yourself. Dr. Mortimer stood, his expression determined. Who are these people? And what do they want with the key? The man's lips twisted into a thin smile. They call themselves the Eternal Order, an ancient faction that has been seeking immortality for centuries. They've tried and failed time and time again, but now, with the Greystones' bloodline and the key in their grasp, they're closer than ever to achieving their goal. Enola's heart quickened. The Eternal Order? Are they the ones who've been watching us? The man nodded. Yes. They've been keeping tabs on you, Miss Holmes, ever since you uncovered the first clue. And they're not just after the Greystone's power, they're after the key. Whoever controls the key controls life itself. It's that simple. Enola's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of information. The Greystones, the key, the Eternal Order, they were all tied together. But she still didn't understand the full scope of it. What did the key unlock? What was the power behind it? What's the next step? She asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. How do we stop the Eternal Order from getting the key? The man's eyes narrowed, a glint of approval in his gaze. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Miss Holmes. The first step is simple. We need to find the key before they do. There's a place where it's hidden. A place known only to the Greystones and their society. And where is that? Enola asked, her pulse quickening. The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was cold, as if he knew more than he was letting on. I'll take you there. But be warned, this won't be easy. The path is treacherous, and there are more obstacles ahead than you realize. Enola exchanged a glance with Dr. Mortimer. She could sense the danger in the air, the looming threat that followed them wherever they went. But she couldn't stop now. She had to see this through. We're ready, Enola said firmly. Take us to the key. The man led them through the winding corridors of the estate, his steps silent and sure. The air grew heavier the deeper they went, as though they were descending into a place long forgotten by time. Enola could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, but she remained focused. They were getting closer to the truth. As they reached a set of heavy wooden doors, the man turned to face them, his expression unreadable. This is it, he said quietly. Beyond these doors lies the heart of the Greystone's secret. The key is within. Enola felt a surge of anticipation. They had reached the final step in this treacherous journey, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change forever. With a deep breath, she nodded. Let's open the door. Chapter 9, The Heart of the Secret. The door before them was old, its wood dark and weathered, yet it held a certain weight, as if it were not just the barrier to a room, but to a hidden truth, centuries in the making. Enola's hand hovered just inches from the handle, her breath catching in her chest. Behind this door, she knew, lay the heart of the mystery she had been chasing. The key, the power, and the ancient legacy of the Greystone family. But she also knew that whatever lay on the other side might be more than she was prepared for. The man, who had led them here, gave them one final, cryptic look before he reached for the door. His fingers were steady as he pushed it open, and with a soft creak, the door revealed the darkness beyond. Stay close, he warned, his voice low. The key isn't just an object. It's a force. And it must be handled with great care. Enola exchanged a glance with Dr. Mortimer. They both nodded, their nerves taut with anticipation. They stepped into the room, and the door clicked shut behind them with a finality that felt like the closing of a chapter. The room inside was not what Enola had expected. There were no ornate relics or treasure chests, no signs of opulence or grandeur. Instead, it was a cold, empty space, the stone walls lined with shelves of dust-covered books and scrolls. The air was thick with the scent of age and forgotten knowledge. The only light came from a small, flickering candle in the far corner, casting shadows that seemed to dance across the room. In the center of the room stood a large, round stone pedestal. Upon it rested a single, weathered box, its surface marked with strange symbols, the same symbols Enola had seen in the Greystone records. It was simple, unadorned, yet it exuded an almost magnetic energy. "This is it," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The key is inside." Enola stepped forward, drawn to the pedestal. Her fingers hovered just above the box. She felt its presence, its power, calling to her, like a hidden pulse beneath the surface of the earth. She had read the warnings in the records. She knew the danger of unlocking what had been sealed away for centuries. But in that moment, there was no turning back. "What exactly is in this box?" Dr. Mortimer asked, his voice full of curiosity and apprehension. "You keep referring to it as the key, but what does it unlock?" The man gave a bitter laugh, his eyes narrowing. "It unlocks more than you can imagine. The power within it is the culmination of generations of Greystone's work. It's not just a key to a room or a place, it's a key to life itself." Enola's heart skipped a beat. Life itself? Was it possible? The very notion was staggering, but everything she had uncovered so far pointed to the truth of it. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the box. It was locked, of course, and she knew that whatever mechanism held it shut was far more complex than any simple lock. "I've been preparing you for this," the man continued, his voice soft. "But understand, Miss Holmes, what you're about to release can't be undone. There are consequences." Enola nodded, her mind racing. "We've come this far," she said, her voice steady. "We have no choice but to see this through." With one final glance at Dr. Mortimer, who was watching with a mix of fascination and concern, Enola grasped the edges of the box and lifted it gently from its pedestal. The moment her hands touched the box, she felt a pulse, a strange, almost electric surge that coursed through her fingertips and up her arms. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she placed the box on the nearby table, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The lock on the box was intricate, carved symbols that seemed to move under her touch. The design was too complex to decipher in a glance, but Enola wasn't deterred. She had spent enough time studying the Greystone family records, the ancient texts, and the cryptic symbols. With a few delicate twists, the lock clicked open. Inside the box, there was nothing immediately remarkable, just a small scroll of parchment, wrapped in a ribbon. Enola carefully unrolled the parchment, her heart pounding in her chest. The writing was in the same cryptic language she had seen in the records, the symbols flowing like an ancient script. But this time, there was something more, a translation in the margins, written in a familiar hand. "The key to immortality is not in the body, but in the blood. The power lies not in the flesh, but in the soul. The Greystones have guarded it, but the key was never theirs to control. The bloodline must be protected, or the world will fall." Enola's fingers shook as she read the final lines, the words sinking into her like a weight. The Greystone's secret wasn't just about living forever. It was about control, a bloodline, a power that went beyond simple life and death. The Greystones had been guarding something far more dangerous than immortality. They had been keeping the world in balance, at least, in their minds. The man standing in the corner of the room moved closer, his eyes scanning the parchment in her hands. "Now you understand," he said softly. "The key to immortality is not merely a physical object. It is the Greystone bloodline, preserved through generations, kept in check by their legacy. But as you've seen, Miss Holmes, it's more than just a family secret. It's a weapon." Dr. Mortimer, who had been standing quietly behind her, spoke up, his voice trembling with unease. "You mean, the Greystones weren't just protecting the bloodline for their own benefit? They were keeping it safe from others, dangerous people who would use it for power?" The man nodded. "Yes. The Greystones believed that they could control it, but the key is not meant to be controlled. It must remain hidden, because once it is unlocked, once the power is released, there is no turning back." Enola clenched her fists. So, the Greystones were guarding not just a secret, but a weapon. And now it's in our hands. The man's gaze turned cold. "It's not just in your hands, Miss Holmes. You are the one who has opened the door. You are the one who has set this in motion." Enola's mind raced. The power of immortality, the key that the Greystones had guarded for centuries, was now in her hands. But what did that mean? Could she, or anyone, control it? Could she even stop it from falling into the wrong hands? "What happens now?" Enola asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. The man stepped back, his expression darkening. "Now, the true test begins. The key to immortality is not just a matter of unlocking a door. It's about choosing who is worthy to wield its power. And right now, Miss Holmes, the world is watching." Enola felt a surge of determination. "Then let them watch. The truth is out. And I'll stop anyone who tries to use this power for their own gain." The man's eyes softened for just a moment, before he gave a slow nod. "Very well, Miss Holmes. But remember, there are others who would destroy everything to possess the key. They will come for you. They will come for the power you now hold. And when they do, you must be ready." Enola took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She was ready. Chapter 10, The Chase Begins. The room seemed to grow colder as Enola stood, the weight of the parchment and the power it described pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had always known that uncovering the truth would come with consequences, but she had never imagined the danger would be so immediate, so real. The man, who had guided them this far, was still watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. Dr. Mortimer stood slightly behind her, his face pale, as though the implications of what they had just uncovered were beginning to sink in. "You've opened Pandora's box, Miss Holmes," the man said, his voice low but edged with something that might have been admiration, or was it fear? "The key is in your hands, and now, there is no turning back." Enola took a deep breath, her mind racing. The Greystones had hidden this power, this weapon, for centuries. The bloodline, the key to immortality, it was all meant to be locked away forever. But now, it had been unlocked, and the world would never be the same again. "We need to leave," Enola said suddenly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Now." Dr. Mortimer, who had been silent for a moment, spoke up, his voice filled with concern. "Miss Holmes, are you sure? We've barely scratched the surface of this mystery. We still don't understand the full scope of what we've unleashed." Enola turned to face him, her eyes sharp. We don't have time to waste. The key is out. There are people, dangerous people, who will stop at nothing to take it from us. We need to get back to Bickley Hollow before they catch up with us. The man in the corner nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Enola. You're right. You've made an enemy of the Eternal Order now. They've been hunting for this key for years, and they won't rest until they have it. But you must understand, this isn't just about immortality. The key unlocks something far greater, something that could change the entire course of history. Enola's heart raced at the thought. The key to immortality was not the end of the story, it was just the beginning. But what lay ahead? What were they really dealing with here? We don't have time for explanations, Enola said firmly. We need to get out, and we need to do it now. The man moved swiftly, crossing the room to the door and opening it with a quiet creak. Then go. You'll need all the help you can get. But remember this, Miss Holmes, once you leave this place, the chase begins. And you'll be hunted for the rest of your life. Enola didn't hesitate. She walked quickly toward the door, followed by Dr. Mortimer. But as she passed the man, he stopped her with one final word. Beware of who you trust, he said quietly, his voice laced with warning. Not everyone who appears to be your ally is on your side. Enola paused for just a moment, but then she stepped out into the cold air, the door closing softly behind her. Dr. Mortimer followed close behind, his expression filled with doubt and concern. Miss Holmes, he said softly, we're walking into something far bigger than we could have imagined. The Greystones have been guarding this secret for centuries. Now it's in our hands, and I fear we might not be ready for what's to come. Enola glanced back at him, her face set with determination. We'll be ready. We have no choice. The journey back to Bickley Hollow was long and tense. The rain had started falling again, the road slick with water and mud. Enola's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one question kept circling in her mind: what had the Greystones been protecting for all these years? The key, it seemed, was not just a physical object, it was tied to something much larger. Immortality was only the beginning. What else could the key unlock? What was the true purpose of the Greystone bloodline, and why had the family gone to such lengths to protect it? As they approached the outskirts of Bickley Hollow, Enola's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound, distant, but unmistakable. The thrum of horse hooves, growing louder with each passing second. Dr. Mortimer's eyes widened. We're being followed. Enola's heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her eyes scanning the foggy landscape. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of a rider, their horse galloping swiftly through the rain. And then, more shapes began to appear, another rider, and another. They were closing in fast. We need to get to the village, now, Enola said, her voice urgent. We won't outrun them on foot. We need shelter. Without waiting for Dr. Mortimer's response, Enola turned and began running toward the nearest building, an old cottage just outside the village. The sound of hoofs grew louder, and Enola knew they were getting closer. Whoever was chasing them was determined and ruthless. As they reached the cottage, Enola slammed the door behind them, her breath coming in quick bursts. She turned to Dr. Mortimer, who had just made it inside, his face pale. What do we do now? He asked, his voice strained with fear. Enola's mind was already working, her sharp instincts kicking in. We wait. We need to figure out who they are, and what they want. The sound of horses outside became muffled as the riders slowed to a stop. Enola moved cautiously to the window, peering out through the rain-slicked glass. She could just make out the figures of the riders dismounting, their cloaks billowing in the wind. There was a tense silence, broken only by the sound of rain against the roof. And then, the door to the cottage swung open with a sudden crash. Chapter 11, The Riders of the Order. The door slammed open with a force that rattled the windows. Enola's heart raced as the shadows of the riders filled the doorway, their cloaked figures cutting stark silhouettes against the gray mist of the storm outside. For a split second, the only sound was the heavy rain, which drummed against the cottage's roof like an uninvited guest. Then, a voice, low and commanding, cut through the silence. "Where is it?" Enola's breath caught in her throat as she quickly surveyed the room. Dr. Mortimer had backed away from the door, his face pale and filled with dread. Enola herself stood frozen, but every nerve in her body was on high alert. These riders, whoever they were, had come for the key. She could feel it. The leader of the group stepped forward, his tall frame almost filling the doorway. His face was hidden beneath the hood of his cloak, but Enola could see the faint glint of steel at his waist, the outline of a sword. "I said," the voice repeated, sharper now, "where is it?" Enola knew she had to keep her cool. Whoever these people were, they were part of the Eternal Order, the dangerous faction that sought the key to immortality. She could sense it in the air, their power, their determination. And yet, they weren't here to negotiate. They had come to take the key by force. Dr. Mortimer, sensing the tension, stepped forward cautiously, his hands raised in an almost placating gesture. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "We've only just arrived." "There is no..." "Don't lie," the rider spat, his voice a venomous hiss. "You're with her, aren't you?" He nodded toward Enola, his eyes hidden but his intent clear. "You've been with her from the start. We know you've found it. We know you've uncovered the secret." Enola's eyes flicked toward the man, her mind racing for a plan. There was no way out of this, at least not through the front door. The riders were blocking their only escape. But there was one thing Enola knew with certainty: she couldn't let them take the key. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. With a calmness that surprised even herself, she stepped forward. "You're looking for the key, aren't you?" she said, her voice steady but forceful. "But I won't give it to you." The rider's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Enola thought she saw something flicker in his gaze, a flash of surprise, followed quickly by a hardened resolve. "You think you have a choice?" His voice was low, deadly. "The key belongs to us. It always has." Enola didn't flinch, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She could feel Dr. Mortimer behind her, tense and uncertain, but she couldn't show weakness. "Not now." "I know who you are," Enola said, her voice unwavering. "The Eternal Order. You've been searching for the key for years, haven't you? You think you can control it, control immortality. But I won't let you use it for your own gain. No one should wield that kind of power." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the rider stepped closer, his boots scraping against the wooden floor. You don't understand, Miss Holmes. The key doesn't belong to you. It never did. The Greystones kept it hidden for a reason. They were just caretakers. But now, we will unlock its true potential. Unlock its potential? Enola's voice rose with disbelief. You're willing to destroy everything just to gain control of it? You don't even understand the consequences of what you're dealing with. This isn't a tool for power, it's a weapon. The rider's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. You think you can protect it? You can't protect something you don't fully understand. Enola didn't back down. I understand enough. I won't let you take it. Not now. Not ever. The leader's eyes flicked to his companions, and without a word, two of the riders stepped forward, their movements deliberate and calculated. Enola instinctively stepped back, but they were closing in. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. Enough, the leader commanded suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a whip. You want to play games, Miss Holmes? Very well. But we will have what's ours, whether you give it to us willingly or not. The riders advanced again, this time with less caution. Enola's mind raced. She couldn't fight them all, not without revealing the key, not without endangering everything. But there was one thing she could do. Her eyes darted to the small window behind the riders. She couldn't escape through the door, but there might still be a way out if she could make it to the back of the cottage. Enola took a step back, her eyes flicking to Dr. Mortimer. Go. Now, she whispered, her voice urgent. Dr. Mortimer seemed to hesitate, but Enola's look was enough to push him into action. He turned and bolted toward the back of the cottage, slipping through the door with surprising speed. Enola didn't wait for the riders to realize what was happening. She had just one shot to get out of this alive. In a sudden motion, she dashed toward the window, throwing her shoulder against the frame. The glass shattered with a sharp crack, and she jumped through the opening, landing outside in the mud and rain. She barely caught her footing before sprinting toward the tree line. Behind her, she could hear the riders shouting, their footsteps heavy on the ground as they rushed after her. But Enola didn't look back. She ran faster, her breath coming in sharp gasps as the storm raged around her. She had to get to Dr. Mortimer. He would know what to do next. The rain lashed at her face as she ran, her mind focused entirely on one thing, survival. The key, the power it represented, was no longer just a mystery, it was a burden. A dangerous, deadly thing that Enola had to protect at all costs. And she knew now that the Eternal Order would stop at nothing to get it. She had to outrun them. She had to outsmart them. But most of all, she had to keep the key hidden. Chapter 12, The Hidden Path. The rain battered against Enola's face as she ran, the cold sting of the water mixing with the sharp rush of adrenaline in her veins. Every breath felt like fire in her chest, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to escaping the riders, at least for a moment. The storm had thickened, the wind howling as though nature itself was conspiring to help her escape. But Enola knew this would only buy her a little time. The Eternal Order was relentless, and if they were closing in now, they wouldn't stop until they had the key. She didn't need to look over her shoulder to know they were after her. She could hear their horses, heavy and purposeful, crashing through the underbrush behind her. Stay ahead, she thought, her mind racing, as she darted through the thick trees and dense undergrowth. Her eyes were fixed ahead, her feet flying over the mud-soaked ground, but she could already feel the weight of the key pressing against her chest. It was in her pocket, a constant reminder of how much danger she was in. The key wasn't just an object anymore, it was her responsibility, and the stakes had never been higher. She pushed harder, knowing she couldn't outrun them forever. She needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere to regroup. A glance around revealed a dense thicket up ahead, a small cave-like opening in the side of a hill. Enola's heart leaped. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to give her the cover she needed. Without hesitation, she veered off her path, heading toward the thicket. The rain had soaked through her clothes, but it was nothing compared to the cold dread gnawing at her thoughts. She had made it out of the cottage, but now she had to disappear. She couldn't let the riders find her, couldn't let them take what they wanted. The key had to stay hidden. She reached the thicket and dove into the narrow opening, crouching low as she squeezed inside. The small cave was cold, damp, and smelled of earth, but it was hidden, concealed by the thick wall of branches and leaves outside. She pressed herself against the farthest corner, holding her breath as the sounds of galloping hooves grew louder. From her cramped hiding spot, Enola watched the riders burst into the clearing, their horses rearing as they pulled up short, scanning the area. They didn't seem to have seen her enter the thicket, but they were searching now, their eyes flicking over the trees and the ground. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but she remained as still as possible, the key pressed tightly against her chest. If they found her, it would all be over. They would take the key, and with it, the power of immortality. Split up, a voice called, sharp and commanding. Enola's heart skipped. It was the leader of the riders. She can't have gone far. Look for tracks. Check the woods. She couldn't have vanished into thin air. The sound of the riders dismounting reached Enola's ears. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunched through the wet leaves. She could hear them just outside the thicket, too close for comfort. She closed her eyes for a moment, holding her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. Time seemed to slow. The rustling of branches, the movement of shadows, everything around her felt amplified, as if the world had narrowed to just this moment. The sound of the leader's voice was unmistakable, his words like a quiet threat. Don't let her escape. If she has the key, we'll deal with her later. The key is the priority. The priority. The key. They were hunting her, not just for her, but for the power she now carried. Enola felt a surge of fear, but she quickly pushed it aside. Fear would do her no good. Not now. She needed to think. She needed to act. Enola's eyes flicked around the small cave, searching for something, anything, that could help her. There were no weapons, no tools, just the damp rock walls and the heavy shadows. But she had her wits. She had always had her wits. The riders outside were getting closer. She could hear their footsteps almost directly above her now. Enola's heart was in her throat as she glanced around, desperately looking for a way out. A plan formed in her mind. It wasn't perfect, but it might work. Dr. Mortimer had escaped with her from the cottage, but now, she had to find him again. He had to be somewhere close by. There was a place, a small cottage by the river that she and her mother had passed by on the way into the village. If anyone could help, it was the old herbalist who lived there. Enola had always trusted her instincts, and the herbalist was one of the few people she felt could be trusted now. The plan was simple: wait until the riders had passed, then head to the river. There was a narrow footbridge not far from the thicket that would lead her to the cottage, where she could regroup with Dr. Mortimer and figure out their next move. Enola knew that every second counted. The riders weren't far behind. And once they realized she wasn't there, they would come looking. She had to be quick. But as the footsteps above her grew fainter, Enola felt a sense of urgency. The riders had spread out to search the woods, and if she didn't move now, she might be trapped. There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of hooves retreating into the distance. They were moving away. Now or never. Enola took a deep breath, her body tense, then slowly, as quietly as she could, she crawled toward the back of the thicket, edging her way out into the rain-soaked underbrush. She moved swiftly but cautiously, her heart thumping in her chest. She could hear the soft sounds of the riders in the distance, but for now, she was hidden from their view. The path to the river was treacherous, the mud thick underfoot, and the trees seemed to close in on her. But Enola kept moving, her determination driving her forward. She could barely see through the rain, but she knew the way. The footbridge was just ahead. The sound of the river grew louder, its current crashing through the rocks, and as Enola emerged from the trees, she saw the narrow bridge ahead of her, its wooden planks slick and wet. The bridge swayed in the wind, but Enola didn't hesitate. She crossed quickly, the water below churning as it carried the rain into the riverbanks. The cottage by the river was just ahead, its windows glowing faintly in the evening light. Enola's steps quickened. She had to make it there before the riders turned around. If they came back, they would find the trail leading to the bridge. Enola reached the cottage and knocked once, twice, on the door, her hand trembling from exhaustion and fear. She didn't know if anyone would be home, but there was no time to wait. She needed help, and she needed it now. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman with a tired, weathered face. She had sharp eyes, and Enola knew at once she was someone who had seen much in her life, and who knew how to keep a secret. "Miss Holmes," the woman said, her voice soft but firm. "I knew you would come." Chapter 13, The Herbalist's Secret. The door creaked shut behind Enola, sealing her inside the warm, dimly lit cottage. The woman who had opened the door, the herbalist, closed the latch quietly and regarded Enola with a knowing look. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her hands, though weathered, moved with a grace that spoke of years of tending to herbs and remedies. Her eyes were sharp, full of a quiet wisdom that Enola immediately sensed. "Come in, Miss Holmes," the woman said, her voice low but welcoming. "You've made it just in time. I wasn't sure you would." Enola nodded in gratitude, her eyes scanning the small room. The cottage was humble, rough-hewn furniture, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and tinctures, the scent of lavender and sage heavy in the air. It was a sharp contrast to the storm raging outside, and for a moment, Enola allowed herself to relax. But she didn't let her guard down completely. She had learned long ago that nothing was ever as it seemed, and this woman, though seemingly kind, was a mystery of her own. "I didn't know who else to turn to," Enola said, her voice strained with the weight of what had just transpired. "I was being chased. They were close. Very close. The herbalist gave her a knowing look but didn't immediately speak. She gestured toward a chair by the fire and made a slow motion to pour something from a clay jug into a wooden cup. "You're running from the Eternal Order," the herbalist said quietly, not phrasing it as a question but as a statement of fact. "I suppose you've learned a great deal about them by now." Enola's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know about them?" The herbalist took a long pause, placing the jug down with a soft clink. She folded her hands in front of her, meeting Enola's eyes with a depth that suggested a life filled with untold secrets. "I've known about them for a long time," she said softly. "And I know why you're here. It's not just the greystones you've uncovered. You're holding the key to something far older, far more dangerous." Enola's breath caught in her throat. "How do you know about the key?" The herbalist gave a thin smile, but it was filled with both sadness and something else, perhaps regret. "I've known of the key for many years, Miss Holmes. I've seen its effects on those who sought it, and I've seen what happens when it falls into the wrong hands. The Eternal Order is just one faction of many, but they're the most persistent and the most dangerous." Enola felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her chest. She had known the greystones were hiding something significant, but now she realized that the power they had protected was far more than a family secret. It was something that could destroy everything if it fell into the wrong hands. And those hands were now reaching out to claim it. "I don't understand," Enola said, her voice hoarse. "What is the key, really? The greystones kept it hidden for centuries, but what exactly does it unlock? Why is it so important?" The herbalist sat down across from Enola, her movements slow and deliberate, as if weighing the gravity of her next words. "The key unlocks more than just immortality, Miss Holmes," the herbalist began, her voice laced with quiet sorrow. "It unlocks the power of the bloodline itself. You see, the greystones didn't just guard the key, they were guardians of the blood. A bloodline that traces back to a time before recorded history. A bloodline tied to a power that existed long before any of us were born. The key is the vessel through which that power flows." Enola's mind raced. The key was not just a physical object, it was a conduit, a way to unlock something ancient. The greystones had protected it, kept it hidden, but for what? And now, she had unwittingly become part of a battle far bigger than she could have ever imagined. "But what is this power?" Enola asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What does it mean? If it's that dangerous, why didn't the greystones just destroy it?" The herbalist closed her eyes, as though reliving a painful memory. The greystones believed they could control it, that they could be its keepers. But the power the key unlocks is not meant to be controlled. It is the essence of life itself. And life, Miss Holmes, is not meant to be hoarded. It cannot be bottled or stored without consequences. Enola frowned, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of information. "You're saying that the greystones protected this power because they believed it was too dangerous for anyone else to have? And now that I've found it, you've unleashed it," the herbalist interrupted gently. "The key isn't just a symbol of immortality. It's the foundation of creation itself. And if the wrong people, like the Eternal Order, gain control of it, they will reshape the world to their liking. The key has the potential to make them rulers of everything. But how?" Enola whispered, her throat tightening. How can something like this be used for such power? The herbalist met her eyes, her expression grave. Because the key is not just tied to immortality. It's tied to creation, to the very forces of life and death. Those who wield it can manipulate the boundaries between life and the void. They can control who lives, who dies, and even who is reborn. It is a power that has the ability to change the course of humanity itself. Enola's stomach churned as the weight of the situation began to settle in. The key wasn't just a relic or a family heirloom, it was a force of nature, something that could alter the balance of the world. And now that she had uncovered it, she was being hunted for it. And if I don't give it up? Enola asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens then? The herbalist's eyes softened with empathy. The Eternal Order will stop at nothing to get it, Miss Holmes. But they are not the only ones who seek it. There are other factions, other groups who have been tracking the key for years. Some want to use it to create an eternal dynasty. Others seek it to control death itself. Enola's thoughts raced. The weight of the key in her pocket felt heavier than ever. But it was too late now to turn back. I can't let them have it, Enola said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. I won't let anyone control this power. I won't let the world fall under the control of people like them. The herbalist nodded, her face etched with understanding. I know, Miss Holmes. And that's why you need to leave. You cannot stay here any longer. You've already made yourself a target. The Eternal Order will be looking for you. Enola's pulse quickened. But where will I go? How do I fight them? The herbalist stood, moving toward a small chest in the corner of the room. She opened it and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. She handed it to Enola with a steady hand. This book contains knowledge, the herbalist said. It's a guide to the key, and to how you can protect it. It also contains the names of those who will help you, people who have been working against the Eternal Order for years. Enola accepted the book, her fingers brushing against its worn cover. Thank you, she said softly. But I don't know if I can do this alone. The herbalist's gaze softened. You're not alone, Miss Holmes. You have allies, more than you know. You just need to trust them. Trust your instincts. Enola nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. She had uncovered a secret that had been buried for centuries. Now she was responsible for keeping it from falling into the wrong hands. But even as the weight of the task pressed on her, Enola knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop. She couldn't. Chapter 14, Allies in the Shadows. The book felt heavy in Enola's hands as she clutched it tightly, its worn leather cover creaking under the pressure. She could feel the weight of its contents, information, secrets, and knowledge that could very well be the difference between life and death. The herbalist had given her no illusions. The road ahead would be treacherous, and the enemies she faced were powerful. But the book was a lifeline, a map to understanding the key and its hidden potential. It was her only guide now. As Enola tucked the book carefully into her satchel, she glanced at the herbalist. The woman's sharp eyes were filled with a quiet understanding, but there was a shadow in her expression, something darker that Enola couldn't quite place. You've done more than I can ever repay you for, Enola said quietly. But where do I go from here? The Eternal Order is looking for me, and I'm alone in this. I can't keep running forever." The herbalist nodded solemnly, her eyes never leaving Enola. "You're not alone, Miss Holmes. There are people who have been watching this situation unfold. They've been waiting for someone like you to come along. But the Eternal Order isn't the only danger. The key is powerful, but it's also a curse. The longer you hold on to it, the more you will be hunted." Enola's mind raced. She had always believed that knowledge was the key to solving any mystery, but this was beyond anything she had ever prepared for. The Greystones, the key, the Eternal Order, it was a puzzle so vast that she could barely comprehend the pieces. And now, she was at the center of it. "Who can I trust?" Enola asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who can I turn to for help?" The herbalist's eyes softened, and for the first time, Enola saw a flicker of something else, a deep, unspoken sorrow. "There's a group," she said, her voice low. "A secret network of people who oppose the Eternal Order. They've been working against them for years, trying to keep the key out of their hands. They'll help you, if you can find them." Enola's pulse quickened. "Where are they?" The herbalist reached into the folds of her robe and produced a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to Enola with a steady hand. "This will lead you to them. But you must be careful, Miss Holmes. The Eternal Order has eyes everywhere. Trust no one unless you're sure they're on your side." Enola took the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I won't forget this." The herbalist gave a small, knowing smile. "You may not have a choice. Be careful, Miss Holmes. The key has a way of revealing the true nature of those who seek it. And not everyone you meet will be who they appear to be." As Enola made her way out of the cottage, the rain had begun to subside, leaving behind a thick fog that clung to the trees like a shroud. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her steps quick and purposeful as she moved toward the small bridge that would lead her back into the heart of Bickley Hollow. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. The Eternal Order was closing in, and she knew that the group the herbalist had mentioned would be her only hope of surviving the storm that was quickly gathering around her. The paper she had been given felt like a lifeline, though she didn't yet know what lay ahead. The scent of the earth and the damp woods filled her senses as she walked, the world around her quiet except for the faint rustling of leaves. She knew the path ahead would be dangerous, but she also knew one thing for sure: she couldn't face it alone. As she crossed the footbridge and entered the village, Enola's mind was already working. The group the herbalist had spoken of, who were they? And why had they been watching the Greystones and the key for so long? Were they truly allies, or were they just another faction vying for control of the power she now held? The questions weighed heavily on her, but she didn't have time for doubt. She had a mission, and she couldn't afford to falter now. Enola reached the edge of Bickley Hollow and glanced around cautiously. She didn't see anyone following her, but that didn't mean she wasn't being watched. The Eternal Order had spies everywhere, and she had no illusions about how quickly they could close in. She needed to move quickly. Following the directions on the piece of paper, Enola walked to a quiet part of the village, a place she'd never been before. It was a small alleyway, tucked between two buildings, overgrown with ivy and shadowed by the high walls of the surrounding structures. As she reached the end of the alley, she saw a door tucked into the side of a small, weather-beaten building. The door was unmarked, but something about it seemed different. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible symbol carved into the wood. It was the same symbol Enola had seen in the Greystone family records, the mark of a secret society. This was it. This was the place. With a steady breath, Enola knocked on the door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the door creaked open slightly, and a pair of eyes peered out at her from the shadows. The eyes were sharp, calculating, and immediately, Enola knew she was being judged. "Yes," the voice asked, low and guarded. Enola didn't hesitate. She pulled the paper from her pocket, holding it up. "I've come to see the people who can help me. The Eternal Order is after me. I have the key, and I need protection." The eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, the door didn't budge. Enola's heart raced as she waited. Had she come to the wrong place? Were they not the allies she had been told about? Finally, the door opened fully, revealing a man in a long, dark coat. His face was hidden in shadow, but there was an air of quiet authority about him. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "We've been expecting you." Inside, the building was dimly lit, filled with books, maps, and various artifacts that gave the place a sense of quiet activity. The man led her down a narrow hallway, and Enola followed closely, her heart pounding with uncertainty and hope. "You're the one who's been tracking the key," the man said, his voice low as they walked. "You've already made an enemy of the Eternal Order. But there are others who want the key as well." Enola stopped short, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man stopped as well and turned to face her. "We're the Order of the Hidden Path. We've been fighting the Eternal Order for centuries. But now, with the key in play, everything changes." Enola's heart skipped a beat. The name Order of the Hidden Path was unfamiliar, but the urgency in the man's voice was clear. They were allies, or at least, she hoped they were. "Are you here to help me?" Enola asked, her voice steady but filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "The Eternal Order will stop at nothing to get the key. I need to know who I can trust." The man regarded her silently for a moment, then nodded slowly. "We will help you, Miss Holmes. But you must understand, we can't do this alone. The key is more than a weapon. It's a curse. And it has the potential to change the world, for better or for worse." Enola's mind raced with the implications of his words. She had been right all along. The key wasn't just about power. It was about control over life, death, and the very fabric of existence. And if she didn't stop the Eternal Order from taking it, the world would never be the same. "We're with you," the man continued. "But first, we need to know one thing. Do you understand what the key truly is?" Enola held his gaze. "I understand enough," she said, her voice steady. "And I won't let the Eternal Order, or anyone else, control it." The man nodded again, a slow, approving gesture. "Then we have much to discuss, Miss Holmes. Come, let us prepare." Chapter 15, The Final Choice. The low, flickering light of the candles cast long shadows across the room as Enola sat at the long wooden table. The Order of the Hidden Path gathered around her. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with urgency and resolve. She had made it this far, but the final test was upon her. The man who had let her in, the one who spoke with quiet authority, sat across from her now. His name was Arthur Vale, the leader of this hidden faction. The deep lines on his face suggested years of struggle and hardship, but his eyes were clear, focused on the task at hand. "We've been fighting the Eternal Order for centuries," Arthur said, breaking the silence. "But this changes everything. The key that you hold, Miss Holmes, is more powerful than any of us imagined." Enola nodded, clutching the leather-bound book the herbalist had given her. It felt like a lifeline in the storm she was facing, a storm that was only growing worse with each passing moment. She had learned enough from the book to understand what the key represented, the ability to control life itself, to alter the course of history. It was a power few could resist, and that's why the Eternal Order had been hunting it for so long. "You said the Eternal Order isn't the only one after the key," Enola said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "Who else wants it?" Arthur's eyes flicked to the others in the room, a group of 5 men and women, each with the same hardened expression. They were all part of this secret society, and each one had sworn to keep the key from those who would use it for their own dark purposes. "The others are scattered," Arthur replied. "Some are just interested in the power, others in what it can do for their cause. But the Eternal Order has the most resources. They are relentless. And the more they learn about the key, the more dangerous they become." Enola leaned forward, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her shoulders. "How do I stop them?" Arthur didn't hesitate. "You don't. Not alone, at least. We can help you, but the key must be destroyed. If it's left in the wrong hands, the world as we know it will cease to exist." Enola's mind whirled. Destroy the key? She couldn't even fathom the idea. It had been buried for so long, protected by the Greystones, only for her to find it. She had spent her whole life solving mysteries, uncovering truths hidden in plain sight, but this was different. This was a truth that could rewrite everything. "But the power it holds," Enola began, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What if I can control it? What if it can be used for good?" Arthur's gaze softened for a moment, but his tone remained firm. "No one controls the key, Miss Holmes. No one. The moment you try, it will consume you. The key is not meant to be wielded by any one person. It belongs to the world, and the world isn't ready for it." Enola felt a pang of doubt. Could she truly destroy something so powerful? Was it even possible? She had the key in her hands, the very thing that could grant immortality, change the course of history. But if she held on to it, could she live with the consequences? Would the Eternal Order stop at nothing to seize it from her? There was so much at stake, and the weight of the decision before her felt almost unbearable. "You're not alone in this," Arthur said, as if reading her thoughts. "We've spent years preparing for this moment, and we'll help you do what's necessary. But the choice is ultimately yours. You can't escape the consequences of wielding that power. But you can choose how it ends." Enola stood, her heart pounding as she walked to the window. The night was dark, the storm clouds still hanging heavy in the sky. But through the rain, she could see the distant lights of the village, small, almost insignificant in the vastness of the world. And yet, to her, they represented everything. The people she had fought to protect, the truth she had uncovered, and the future she could still shape. Enola turned back to face Arthur and the others. I won't let the Eternal Order take it. But I can't destroy it either. Arthur's eyes narrowed, a look of concern crossing his face. Then what will you do, Miss Holmes? Enola took a deep breath, her decision forming in her mind. She had learned so much, but now she had to decide what to do with it all. The key was not just an object, it was the fulcrum upon which the balance of the world would tip. It was the power to control life itself, and if that power was allowed to fall into the wrong hands, it would be the end of everything she held dear. I'll hide it, she said, her voice steady with resolve. I'll keep it safe, out of reach from everyone, Eternal Order, or anyone else. They won't stop hunting me, but I'll make sure they never find it. The key will remain lost, forgotten, hidden from the world. Arthur stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. It's not an easy choice, Miss Holmes. But it may be the only choice left. Enola glanced at the others in the room, each one nodding in agreement. She wasn't alone. And she wasn't just running anymore. She was making a stand. The Eternal Order would never stop searching for the key, and she couldn't allow it to fall into their hands. But she also couldn't bear the thought of using it. It wasn't meant for anyone to control. The world had to remain free from the temptation of immortality and the destruction it would bring. The decision was made. Enola had to hide the key, not just from the Eternal Order, but from the world itself. The key was too dangerous, too powerful. Its legacy had to be buried, and she was the one to do it. She would protect it with her life, if necessary. But she would never use it. As Enola prepared to leave, her mind was filled with a new sense of purpose. She had made the hardest decision of her life, but it was the only one she could make. The world would remain as it was, imperfect but free. And as for Enola Holmes, she had begun to understand the true meaning of the adventure she had undertaken. Thank you for joining Enola on her journey. The mysteries may be solved, but there are always more waiting to be uncovered. Keep searching.